Good morning, everybody. How you doing?
Morning, Rob.
Morning.
Glenn, you're up in Massachusetts?
Yes.
Nice.
Morning,
So,
Rob.
morning. I'm wondering, how are we seeing the co-ops putting out concessions or commissions? I just did a couple of samples. Now I'll wind up repeating this here, but I just wanted to get your take. In Westfield, we had 10 properties I looked at from the 1st of August. 4 of them said yes, that they were offering out, considering a concession. Of those 4, only 1 had an amount on it. 2 of them clearly said no, but that was the same agent. And 4 of them had nothing on offering concessions. I don't know if I'm to read into that. And then in Morris County, there were 7 that said that they were offering seller concessions. 7 were offering seller concessions. 9 were silent. 1 said call listing agent, and 0 said no concessions will not be considered. So just curious to see, what are you seeing out there in your market, and how is your MLS processing that? I don't know, I guess maybe I'll ask Michael or Elizabeth, have you got a feeling on what the competition is publishing, or the preponderance of what they're publishing in the MLSs for compensation or concessions?
There's no more compensation on the MLS. Concession, you talking about to the seller to the buyer directly?
Right. Well, we all know that there's no compensation on the MLS, but are they offering comp when we call them? Like if you call them and say, "Hey, are you cooperating?" What are most of our competitors doing?
They are cooperating.
So most are cooperating. And
They are cooperating.
Does the Beaches MLS have a field for the seller is offering a concession?
They did put a field that says, well, on the 13th is when we'll see the field, but it says concession to the buyer, seller concession to buyer. I believe that's what it's called.
Right now, there's no field, or is there still a commission field?
The commission fields, they come off, all of that comes off on August 13th. So tomorrow.
So that is TBD ... We have our MLS president there, El Presidente. When you show up,
Yeah, hi.
you risk getting called on.
I don't mind.
What are you seeing? Do you have any more insight into a macro level as to what's happening in All Jersey MLS and others?
So for us, it's been business as usual. They did eliminate the field already, and we're waiting for a confirmation. There will most likely be a seller concession field. We have noticed a lot of folks trying to skirt the issue and putting in interesting ways around it, but the reality is that none of them are allowed. You can't put a 1-800 number there that leads you to a prompt, that leads you to somebody telling you what the commission is. It just doesn't work. But other than that, it's been a flawless transition, to the extent that on the MLS side, everything is still the way it was. The only difference is the commission's not there. So.
Gotcha. I guess I'll go to, I don't know, Charles, are you able to give me some insight as to what's happening in maybe Bright MLS, if you're in there much?
I just got on the call, so I apologize, Rob. Bright MLS, they've supposedly made the changes with the commission, but my old listing commission is in there. They're supposed to revise existing listing agreements. If it's not done by the 14th, then I'll go in and somehow figure out or give Bright MLS a call in terms of stripping that information. Was that the question?
Yeah, they still have co-op compensation there?
Yeah, from prior listing to 8/1, yes.
Okay,
At least in when I go in to edit my listing, because I went in to edit the listing this weekend, and I noticed that the fields is still in there. What I'll do is when I get back to the house and log in, I'll check to see how it appears if I just do a search on it. So that was from my dashboard. I can still see it, but I would think that that should have been removed and all the new fields should have been in there. But I think they have till the 14th or the 17th to make the changes.
well, I think in New
Rob?
Jersey, it's supposed to be the first, right, Rob Durso?
Yes,
No,
it was.
not-
Um,
I'm sorry,
the
Charles.
MLSs were supposed to do
With
that
the
for
new
the first.
Yeah, with the governor's new law, I think most MLSs, but Bright is like 95% outside of New Jersey.
If I just real quick, I just want to give most everybody a heads up if you haven't heard already. A lot of the MLSs have opted out of collecting any paperwork. All Jersey MLS has said you can use any listing agreement that you want because they're not collecting listing agreements any longer. That doesn't mean they won't spot check to make sure you have the proper listing agreement, but most of the MLSs have said, I know Garden State definitely, we're not collecting your paperwork, do whatever you want with paperwork. So that will eliminate possibly another piece of paper because you can have your commission on your paperwork.
So, Rob or anyone with better knowledge than I, if they're offering compensation outside of the MLS and you get that confirmed, is there still a procuring cause argument, or is that completely gone away now?
I believe it's pretty much history because you're going to have a buyer, you're supposed to have a buyer agency agreement. So if you do, it kind of tells you right off the bat who you're working with. The challenge comes in when
It's saying it's not.
you don't have a buyer agency agreement, and then all bets are off. So,
All right, I'm going to mute everybody, and then you can unmute yourself to talk. So, I guess if there's multiple buyer agency agreements, or if somebody claims that they're unrepresented, I guess there might still be procuring cause issues. I'm not sure if the infrastructure is still going to be there with the MLS is having that veracity to do it. The next question is, if you see people putting in no comment, or if they're silent, they're not putting in that the seller will entertain, which is the MLS I was doing most of my research on. Will seller consider concessions? It looks like 8, 12. Looks like out of the 14 people that filled that field out, 12 of them said yes, and it was only one agent that did it twice, where they said they won't consider any concessions. I think everything is negotiable. I would submit an offer even if they said there's no concession, saying that I have a buyer's agency agreement. I'd like you to pay my buyers my 2 or 3% commission. When there is a offer of compensation, right, where they're offering to do the old, co-broke commission, and you call them up and I say, hey, Andrew, are you offering co-broke? And Andrew says, yes. Are we getting a separate broker-to-broker agreement signed, or are we just accepting that verbal representation, or hopefully a written email or a text message?
Hi, Rob, it's me. So speaking of that, there is a broker to broker compensation agreement. And if they say yes, they're offering a commission, right? Straight commission, 2%, whatever it is, you must include that with the offer. And the other agent signs it, and our agent submitting the offer will have to sign it.
So that only goes with the offer. That does not go when, like, you don't go to the extreme and say, hey, I need that before I show the property, right? You wait until the contract comes together.
Correct. Can you imagine if you had the listing and you were signing all those agreements just by someone showing the property? It would just be too chaos. So you submit that when you're sending your offer, make sure you get that signed at the time. Don't let it be like towards the end and then they change the commission and you don't have anything in writing. So make sure that form is submitted with the offer.
Real quick, just to throw in there, you are still putting your commission on the contract as well.
No,
At
you
least
cannot
that's
do that
my
in
understanding.
Florida.
No,
No.
not here in Florida.
It's a yes or no, Rob. So when it says the contract of sale have changed, so there's like where you put the listing information and the buyer agent information. My understanding is that you're only going to put yes or no whether it's being offered by who's paying the commission from. So at least the attorneys know, but you cannot add the percentage on the contract.
So that one's odd because I guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 offers that I've received, all offers, but 6 in the last 1 week had it in there. Every one of them.
Well, it might be different for you in New Jersey, but here in Florida.
So let
we're
me
not
speak
allowed to
about
do it.
Florida. So in Florida, you cannot, well, let me just rephrase it. It's a gray area, whether or not you put it on the contract when you send in the offer. Under additional terms, you can put some type of verbiage that says the seller agrees to pay the buyer's commission, but it has to be that, it's looked upon no, because there's a compensation form that needs to follow the offer.
Right.
So here in Florida, agents do that all the time, and when they sign their name, they put a percentage and all that. That is no longer acceptable. So you have to be very careful on the additional terms if you put that type of verbiage. So going back to you, Ron Piccolo, no, it's better to send the compensation form that says either the listing broker is paying the selling broker a commission or the seller is paying the buyer's agents a commission directly. In Florida, we have 2 forms for that.
But we
Now-
can send the form first when we're making an offer, right?
No,
No, you don't have, before you make an offer, you can do that, yes.
no, you don't send the form before you make the offer. You call the listing agent and you find out whether or not they are offering anything to the buyer's agent. Then when you send in the offer, you send in the compensation form attached to the offer. Just like I do in the state for New Jersey, the same thing applies for Florida.
Right, you
So-
can call the listing agent if they're offering a compensation along with your contract, you can send a compensation form. Have it all signed as one part of a complete contract.
Yeah, that's what I
Right,
just said.
and I think now, it probably, I know in the past, we couldn't put on a contract if they're offering 2%, we couldn't effectively increase our compensation to 2.5 by putting it onto the contract. But I imagine here, if it's a negotiation, which it is, we could have transparency with our buyer. Our buyer's paying us 2 3/4, we can go and say, hey, we want our compensation agreement to be 2 3/4, and that would be a negotiation, not a breach of fiduciary duty, especially if the buyer is saying to ask the seller to pay the 2 3/4 or whatever we're getting paid. I think that's pretty accurate. I know it's a lot to think about. And then I know one national brokerage had a big stir where they said that FAQ 19 and 32 of NAR's settlement interpretation conflicted. And they had actually said nationwide they weren't going to be doing any co-op commissions. And I think they might have reversed on that, but that was a big stink.
Yeah, Rob, also too on Friday, are you aware of New Jersey or Florida? Colorado announced that they would not be participating because the state regulators trump NAR. So the state of Colorado will not be adhering to any BBAs or anything to that nature. Do you know anything of New Jersey or Florida doing the same from a
No.
state regulator?
So you're saying that Colorado's saying that we're ignoring the proposed settlement and our state law is superseding the NAR settlement?
Correct, they were the first state to do that on Friday.
They smoke too much pot out there.
So they're curious to see what the other 49 states that participate with NAR will do.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I was curious about that too.
You know, I went to a listing appointment the other day, Ryan and I did. And the seller said to us, so I heard we don't have to pay, you know, the commission to a buyer's agent. Because they're being paid by the buyer. And I said, in most cases that could happen. I said, but, you know, if the buyer cannot afford to pay the list of the buyer's broker, you know, we have to be open to pay the buyer's broker some sort of a commission or compensation to the buyer.
So Ron, I would probably, rephrase that into the interest of the seller instead of the buyer's agent. If the buyer can't afford, I might say in order to have a larger buyer pool, there may be times where we might entertain paying the buyer's broker, because in that case, it sounds like your seller's, making a sacrifice because the buyer can't afford it. But in reality, the seller is going to look at all the offers and consider what's in their best interest. Do you know what I'm saying? I think
That's true,
a
yeah.
case where words matter. And, I would just say,
Yeah,
let's get in the habit of saying, hey, Ron, in order to have a larger buyer pool, there may be times we entertain offering compensation to the buyer's agent if it's in our best interest.
sounds good, yeah.
All right.
Rob, I kind of like the
Rob-
tactic of taking it out of their hands. So when they think it's their money per se, they immediately think, oh, well, I don't want to do that. So I mean, the statement I make to them when they say, hey, I heard we don't have to offer that. And I say, well, you didn't have to when Reagan was president. You didn't have to when Clinton was president. You didn't have to at all. But let me just tell you that the only person coming to the closing table with a check is the buyer. So the buyer is actually paying it.
Right,
And
right.
usually
Sure.
people just stop right there. And then they say, so what do I need to do? And I say, to put your best foot forward, here's what, some people are doing. And then they make the decision.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, it's gonna be a more skilled based game, and I think we need to have the foundation, and then we need to have the, it's not the message, it's not the message we deliver, it's the way it's received, and we just need to be conscious of that because, the seller might be like, oh, cool, I don't have to pay now, I'm going to save, $15,000, 12, whatever that number is, and it's our job to educate them. And I'm going to take that a step further and say that that mountain becomes massively higher if we're responding instead of initiating that conversation. And I'll say that again, that challenge, becomes massively, probably 5x harder if they say to you, hey, Andrew, I heard I don't have to pay commission. I don't want to do that because I want to save 15 grand, as opposed to us talking to every one of our sellers and saying, hey, Rob, just wanted to let you know that with these changes, here are the additional opportunities we have to negotiate for the highest and best net price for you. Right. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, but that's kind of my opinion. If they ask first, we're playing defense, and I don't think that's the right way to go.
Agree.
Yeah, I think you've got to make sure that sellers are in control. They want to feel like they're in control, and I think that whole negativeness needs to be. I mean, I don't ever have a problem with any of my sellers offering a commission to a buyer's agent. I just think you just have to, like you said, when they feel like they're in control and they're holding the wheel, you're going to get anything done that you need to get done. So,
yeah, I mean, we're talking about, what's in our client's best interest and giving them the best advice to make a quick choice.
all right.
Have any of us changed our conversations with sellers in terms of you know, hey, don't pay it? Like, is anybody making a major change in that approach?
No.
No. I did change my approach for telling what the buyer's comp will be. I have a kind of a canned response now for buyer's agents because I figure they're probably the least skilled on the listing side, and someday they're going to hit a listing, and I don't want them to take that listing at zero. So I use the opportunity to tell them what we're offering as an education opportunity.
I have a question for you guys. What do you guys plan on doing when you represent the buyer and the seller?
That's
Getting
easy
both
for
sides.
me because I only represent sellers and landlords. I have a team, I have my team that'll represent the buyer side. I've been doing that 9-10 years now.
Right.
Well, you
because
still can, you still can, you still can get your commissions. If you're working both sides of the deal, I think you just need to get the buyer to sign the buyer's broker agreement because you're working both sides. So I think you become a single agent at that point or a dual agent.
Transaction broker still. Because if you're a single agent, then of course your fiduciary duty is only to the listing. So if you want to
Well,
represent
that's
the buyer-
true, yes, if you're the listing broker, but if you're working, if the seller, if you tell the seller you're working with both sides, I have a buyer and, I'm working both sides of the deal. So now you become a transaction broker. And then you can charge whatever commission, is acceptable.
Right. I mean, and everybody, I'm just going to caveat, this is where we get slippery because it's different by state. Because I think in New Jersey, I'm looking at like
Hey,
Glenn,
Rob, I'm here. If you want me to just answer really quick for New Jersey, so there's no confusion. The designated agency now does exist, but if the person who asked the question is in New Jersey, you can still have a dual agency, just like you have. If your seller is not offering any type of compensation or concession to the buyer, you still need a buyer agency agreement. You would need to negotiate a percentage with your buyer. However, let's just say the seller's offering 2% to the buyer's agent. The buyer walks in unrepresented and they say, I want you to represent me. You can still do that. Now, if you choose to charge them 2% or 2.5% and have them pay that additional 0.5%, you can. It's allowed, at least for New Jersey.
Right,
It's
and
like
then-
that.
right, and then the new term of unrepresented buyer is something that we're gonna have to, find how we're going to address that in the different states, because if there's somebody that's unrepresented, there's certain things that we need to do that would normally be done by the buyer's agent, right? Which we should be compensated for, and we should be transparent with that.
So yeah, if there is a buyer that's unrepresented that come to see my listing, and they want to write an offer, the seller, in the event that there is a buyer's agent, will pay a commission, but that back then it used to be like the commission is 5-6%. We split with the buyer's agent in case there is one. Here, how do you present that?
Okay, repeat the question again.
So how it used to be is that the commission is 5 or 6% in average, and then if there is a buyer's agent, we split that with them. That's how we always presented it to the sellers. Now, how do you present that that we want to get paid on the buyer side as well if the buyers comes to us directly?
Rob, that's Guy from Florida, so that's a Florida question.
Right, but we I mean, you still could you could take a 5 or 6%, putting out 2.5 or 3, and then if you get the buyer directly, I don't see how that really changes as long as we are disclosing that. You just become, I mean, in that circumstance, you become a transaction broker, right, Elizabeth?
You
I
can
mean,
see that's
here
a
we are always
transaction.
transaction
We're
broker
always
in
transaction
Florida.
broker. Mhm.
That's also defined in the listing. Your listing agreement is between your seller and yourself. If you've got a 6% listing agreement, part of that says that if you cooperate with a co-broker, here's the percentage that's going to that co-broker. If you're not, you're entitled to the 6%.
That is correct. So in Florida, we should only be using the one for transaction broker. And it's important to remind our listing agents that when they're negotiating with their seller, they're negotiating their listing commission, not the buyer's co-op cooperating commission, their listing commission. So if the seller agrees to give you 6%, you can, under the new rules, offer part of that 6% to the buyer's agents directly from agent to agent, and we have a form for that. But if you don't want to do that, you can negotiate a 6% listing to yourself. There's no rule that says you cannot. I know that, you know, we always here in Florida, at least we had that idea, and the norm was 6%, 3 and 3, 5%, 2.5, 2.5, and so forth. That's just the way that we did business, but that's not the way that we have to do business.
Right.
So, you know, that's important for all of us to understand that as listing agents, we're negotiating directly with the seller. Obviously, we want to talk to the seller about cooperating because that way we have a better pool of buyers come in their way and all that. But that strictly depends on the market. It depends on the price point of the property. There's a lot of factors involved that you have to take in consideration when you are negotiating a listing commission with your seller, not just across the board, half and half.
Right, in my listing agreements, usually I go for 5% or 5.5 or 6%. Should I procure the buyer, then I will give the seller a 0.5% discount. And that's specific in my listing agreement.
Right, because you're adding that under additional terms of the listing agreement.
Correct.
So I have a, and I'm gonna ask you, Donna, because you were at the same meeting where Barry Goodman said several times that state law trumps federal or the NAR settlement. Now, I always thought federal law trumps state law.
I don't believe that because the state issues the licensing for a professional.
Correct.
So the state mandates.
But like, for example, in lending, right? You know, some states had prepayment penalties on residential mortgages. The federal government came out and said that there's no prepayment on primary residence purchases, right? So that trumped all the states that were allowing, you know, prepayment penalties, because I don't know if anybody's ever been in the business long enough to see a prepayment penalty on a residential mortgage. Anybody, Ron, you ever remember that?
No, well, no, not really. I've never.
That's been
never
a
experienced
federal across the board, trumping, you know, all the, like, you know, the banks that are licensed by the state are still subject to the federal statute because they're part of the, you know, the United States of America. Now, I was a little bit uncertain as to, you know, if there's a federal statute that comes out and then the state says we're allowing it, maybe that's uncharted territory, like the marijuana law, right? You know, it's illegal federally, but states give licenses to operate, you know, dispensaries, but you can't put that money into a federal bank because then it could be seized. I mean, it's very, very complex in my opinion. I'm not trying to make it more complex, but I think, you know, as long as we're not operating in Denver, you know, it seems like we're complying with the NAR settlement through, you know, our state leadership in terms of boards and the state legislature. Like New Jersey kind of took the federal settlement and kind of wrote it into, you know, a Consumer Protection Act. Anyway, that's just food for thought. Did anybody see that the Zillow, Rich Barton stepped down from Zillow?
Yes,
Interesting timing, huh?
that was Friday's news too.
He needs time to play with his money.
And I'm wondering if they are going to have like disclosure issues with regard to their business model on the Flex, where it's a referral fee model.
I just paid one last week, Rob, in Florida, and I saw the agreement come across. And so if consumers on that end, right, on the other end, and they agree to the showing process, so that's one form that they fill out. If they decide to buy that home that was in that showing process, there is about 7 pages that they have to sign and agreeing to the percentage. It was 1.5 actually.
And don't be surprised if somewhere down the pike, you know, referral fees kind of get put under the microscope as well. Hey, I'm referring, somebody to California, or I'm taking an incoming referral fee, that has to be, disclosed on the settlement. I would not be shocked if that were something that's coming down the pike soon.
Right, and a
Um,
set amount too, Rob. It can't be 30 here, 25 there, 35 here. It's got to be a set amount across the board.
Well, I mean, that would seem to be price fixing though, Foz. Like, that would seem to be like going against the, everybody having a standard, but.
Right, but so
I'm not-
like Zillow, right? Zillow does 35% for all Zillow. It has to
They
be the
do,
same.
they do 40% now.
The one that came in last week was at 35. So that's, yeah.
But
Hey
anyway,
Glenn, what
so
about Redfin? Because Redfin does a lot of referrals. I know you've got an agreement with them. Have they changed?
No, 35%.
yeah, but yeah, I think that the consumer, like in reading into the Rich Barton thing, I think that the consumer is not aware that when you get transferred to a Zillow partner through Flex, that partner's paying a 40% referral fee, and I think that might be something that sheds light where Zillow wouldn't like light to be shed, right? Because if I'm a buyer, right, and I'm paying a 40, and my agent's paying a 40% fee to Zillow, isn't that in effect something that might have to be reflected on that buyer agency agreement? Think about it. Because the buyer is then funding the Zillow referral as well, right?
Good point. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where Rich Barton couldn't close the circle and decided to tap out. Because I can see that being a big, I can see a lawyer getting their paws into that, right?
Well, Rob, I
That
think
sou-
that your
that
point
sounds
about
like-
that is,
Yeah.
What's that?
I was going to say your point about this disclosure on that front. I think eventually the designated agency piece will also kind of stimulate that as people get their hands around it, because team leaders technically take compensation, and you could say, I'm just going to put a team member on it, but that's not truly transparent, right? Because you do have a piece of the pie.
Yes. I mean, team leaders, brokers, I think that's kind of like an internal sharing, but when you get to the part of a third party company charging a referral fee, and I don't know how you can not argue that working a buyer lead from Zillow, you have less flexibility because your referral fee than if it were a non-Zillow referral, right? I mean, how do you bury 40% in your cost structure, right?
Yep.
So anyway, there's food for thought. We're overtime here, guys and ladies. Let's maybe pick this up the first 10 minutes of next Monday's call, and let's see what Florida comes out with on their MLSs, how that plays out, and if anyone has any exceptions, like, hey, this person's refusing to cooperate after they said they would. I had somebody say that, but I forget who it was, but that when they lowered the price, they were no longer offering compensation. So, I call up Glenn and say, hey, Glenn, are you co-oping on this? And Glenn texts me back, says, yeah, 2.5% at $7.99. Now the price goes to $7.59. And the agent says, we're no longer co-oping, we lowered the price. So ponder that one. I think they have a problem, but I'm not sure. Right? Could a seller change their mind? Of course. But how do we disclose that? Do you have to tell everybody that you told it's 2.5, that it's no longer being compensated?
It's interesting
if
to see
it,
what happens after the dust settles, going into 6 months later and seeing where properties are and closings are and sellers and all this other stuff, because I think it'll change.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree with you. I think there's going to be a lot of things shaking out as we move forward.
Well, the good news is, and I always like to leave on a high note, is, people still need housing. we now, in my opinion, provide a even more necessary service. And we separate ourselves by being on these calls and trying to get ahead of issues. So that I think that everybody here will actually be, increasing your market share and growing in a uncertain market, right? That's where we really get the separation. So
I
think
I
it's
agree
think it's a huge
100%. We will rise to the top because we have better understanding, we have better support, and we're not negative. To me, it's about a positive.
I
And
think
by
it's
the
a
way,
huge
we're back in the
opportunity.
fives. The rates are 5.8, 5.9. So that's good news for the buyers, and hopefully they'll drop a little bit more.
and Scott and everybody on this call, when a consumer looks in your eyes and they see fear, you're dead.
That's right.
Okay, when they people look in your eyes and they want to have certainty. You don't want to go to a doctor and have them like, I don't know about this, Ron. You're going to get a second opinion, right? So if they
course, yeah.
sense fear or uncertainty, or even complacency, and the complacency goes towards, waiting for our customer to ask us on our current listings, hey, do I need to do this? Or we go out on the listing appointment and, Glenn said, in the, Clinton administration, the Ford administration, you didn't have to do it, right? You have a very memorable way of conveying that information, Glenn. And, we want to make sure that the consumer knows that we are only going to offer compensation if it's in our best interest. This is not a shakedown. This is not a mob activity. This is like, hey, if we offer compensation, we can get more qualified buyers. Do you think that's a good thing that we want to do? And we get their buy-in on that, okay? Because the whole narrative is gone sideways in the media, and of course we'd expect it to go sideways like everything else in the media. I look forward to next week. This is really informative and important for me to hear what you're seeing on the front line and try to give you cutting edge, immediate decisions on how we're going to react. Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye, guys.